No way! Terence Bud Crawford is the undisputed, undefeated super middleweight champion of the world. He beats the guy, the prize fighter, the face of boxing of this generation, Saul Canelo Alvarez, in a fight that wasn't even close. Bud Crawford dominated him from start to finish. He was clearly the better fighter in this matchup, and I am shocked by it because many people thought Canelo was going to win. Canelo Alvarez was the favorite. He was the bigger name. He was the bigger person in terms of the weight class he fights in. He had gone through like 9 defenses of his super middleweight crown when he unified all the belts against Caleb Plant like 4 years ago, and this matchup was one of the biggest matches that we've seen in boxing, and I think it's the biggest fight we've seen in boxing since Floyd Pacquiao 10 years ago. That's how big this was. And this may have even been bigger because it was in a stadium in front of 70,000 people and it was on Netflix in front of 100 million people worldwide. Maybe the biggest fight of your entire life in terms of how many eyes are on this fight. And Terence Crawford showed why he is the guy. Max Kellerman said at the end of the matchup, he will be remembered as the GOAT of this generation of boxers. That's how special he is, and that's how great he fought tonight. I am at an absolute loss for words. Okay, so let's circle back here. Canelo Alvarez had gone through a spell where he was clearly comfortable at 168. He had fought a couple of guys at 175, but 168 was where he was the most comfortable, and he had decided, I'm going to unify all of the belts. Now, one of my biggest issues with people talking about Canelo Alvarez is that they have this idea that he ducked a lot of fighters. Completely untrue. We remember what happened with Triple G. Nobody wanted to touch Triple G. He was undefeated. Canelo Alvarez beat him. Then 3 months later, he fights Rocky Fielding. He absolutely, killed him. Rocky Fielding shouldn't have been in the same ring in December 2018, but Canelo Alvarez beat him. He was a champion. He held a belt. May 2019, he fights another guy with a belt. Danny Jacobs beats him in a unanimous decision. Then, 6 months later, he goes up 2 weight classes, because remember, he fought Danny Jacobs at 160. He goes up 2 weight classes to fight Sergey Kovalev at 175, the guy who made Andre Ward retire. Let's not forget that. Andre Ward retired because of Sergey Kovalev, even though Andre Ward beat him. Kovalev was the guy who he had his last 2 fights against, and he retired, you may say prematurely, or not, but hey, respects to Andre Ward. Pandemic happens. Canelo decides, I'm the most comfortable at 168 pounds. I'm going to unify this division. He beats the champion in Callum Smith, my mistake. He beats the champion pretty easily. He fights Abney Yildirim, who cares about him. Then he beats Billy Joe Saunders, who was undefeated and held a belt, beat him. Beat Caleb Plant, undefeated and held a belt, beat him. He was just taking belt after taking belt after taking belt off of people. World champions, and he was fighting them and picking them apart. So I don't like the argument that Canelo was ducking fighters because everybody that he fought during his rise to become the undisputed super middleweight champion was a champion. Then we saw what happened. He tried to be maybe a little bit greedy. He fought Bivol at 175, got outboxed if we're being completely honest. Bivol's naturally bigger, so I didn't really favor him, but you just thought Canelo was so great that maybe he'd go ahead and do it. But he fought Bivol and lost. Fought Triple G again, but Triple G was washed at that point at 168, beat him pretty convincingly. Fought other guys like John Ryder and whatever, went back to Mexico, was kind of in a dull moment where he was just collecting money and not really producing great stuff that you may think like, oh, this is a real hard challenge for Canelo and this is going to define his legacy. But then comes Terence Crawford. Now, let me tell you who Terence Crawford is. Terence Crawford is a man who won a belt at 135 pounds, a belt at 140 pounds, a belt 147 pounds, and just beat a guy at 154 pounds on points before he fought Canelo. This is a guy who's naturally a much smaller fighter, but one of the best technical fighters that you'll ever see, who's been at the top or near the top, close to that range of pound-for-pound fighters for 5, 6, 7 years. A guy who, in a fight against Errol Spence, a fight that we had wanted to see for a very long time, we thought that this was the matchup that we wanted to see at around the 147-ish pound range. These are the 2 guys, both undefeated at the time, both very unique, technically sound fighters. Terence Crawford took him apart. That matchup wasn't even close. He beat the shit out of Errol Spence. And then Terence Crawford beats up another guy in a higher weight class. He's undefeated. Nobody can touch him, and he's always the better man. But even though we knew that Terence Crawford was the better technical boxer, we always felt like Canelo Alvarez is just bigger and stronger, and he just has the advantage over him. There are weight classes for a reason in boxing. I've heard the argument many times. Max Kellerman has given it that Manny Pacquiao is actually a greater pound for pound fighter than Floyd Mayweather. For a guy to start at flyweight, at like 108 pounds ish, skip 2 weight classes during that mark, but obliterate division after division after division, and then be that good as a welterweight from what, like 108 pounds to 147 pounds, that big of a gap is insane, and you have to say he's one of the greatest pound for pound fighters ever, maybe even greater than Floyd Mayweather, just because of how impressive that is. But even though Pacquiao was 36 when that fight happened against Floyd, I would have favored Floyd at a younger age. He's the naturally larger fighter, and that's always going to play an advantage. But Canelo is odd from the perspective that he fights at a higher weight class, but Terence Crawford is actually slightly taller than him and has more than 4 inches of an advantage in reach than him. But yet Terence Crawford usually fights at more than 20 pounds lighter than he fought now. It's kind of strange, but that tells you there are weight classes for a reason in boxing, but there are also levels in this game. And as great as Canelo Alvarez is, when he faces a guy who has a huge rank up in level, he tends to get in trouble. And if we go in this fight, I thought that Canelo had no advantages like we talked about at the beginning, but the punches thrown in the first round, there were really none. They were just filling each other out, which is common in boxing fights. But then we saw that all we were waiting for was Canelo to hand a huge punch to the head to Terence Crawford and how he would handle it, because Canelo is much larger and you feel like overall has more power. Anytime those punches came, and they didn't come as often as you would like to, as Terence Crawford was much more active, but anytime those punches came, Terence Crawford kept doing this, he didn't feel it. You can't hurt me. And all of his responses to that were with counter punches and were with combinations that Canelo couldn't respond to. Canelo, responded sometimes too, but Crawford always responded significantly better. It looked like Crawford's power was maybe even better than Canelo's was. Crawford had him red from the second round. That's how good Crawford fought in this matchup. Canelo couldn't find an opening, couldn't find a hole. The 5th round was by far Canelo's best round. I felt like he found some openings and he was able to split the guard and land some straight right hands, but Crawford responded right back. And in the 6th round, he was the better man again, and the better man again. And I scored this fight 117-111 for Crawford. I don't believe that Canelo won any rounds back-to-back. He maybe won, several rounds, but he didn't win any of them back-to-back. He wasn't putting bunches of rounds together like Crawford was. And that's the thing. So he probably won 3 rounds, but he wasn't putting bunches of rounds together. Crawford was doing that, and he was just elevating his game. Canelo has to get closer to him because Crawford has a reach advantage. But Crawford was so comfortable. You saw him smiling, grinning, sticking his tongue out like, you ain't got this, you ain't got me. His face looked completely fine. No marks, no bruises whatsoever. He was, keeping the distance because, like I said, he's the longer fighter, and Canelo couldn't touch him. Canelo seemed like he was getting frustrated. No smiles from him, no grinning from him. It wasn't the same thing. He hasn't fought a guy of this caliber, I believe, since Triple G. I'm not going to count Bivol because Canelo was just trying something. But I believe since Triple G, Terence Crawford hasn't fought a fighter Canelo hasn't fought a fighter as great as Terence Crawford, especially over the last couple of years where he's just been fighting guys who are way worse than him and collecting a massive check. And Terence Crawford is special. He is that guy. He is the undisputed super middleweight champion. Look, he's about to turn 38 later this month. And I talked about a bunch of times about how athletes are just playing significantly longer and performing significantly longer later on in their careers nowadays. But you sort of have the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this could be the perfect swan song for Terence Crawford's career. One of the biggest fights, by far the biggest fight that we've seen in 10 years, but maybe the biggest fight that we've seen this century in terms of how many eyes are on the matchup. Terence Crawford may go out here and say this is a perfect ceremonial swan song to a fantastic career. And I wouldn't have any problem with him doing that. He has completely earned it, and he just really beat up the guy who was the number 1 fighter of this era in terms of magnitude, in terms of money, in terms of prize power. And he did it without much of a break of a sweat, it felt like. It wasn't as much of a domination as Errol Spence. Give credit to Canelo. He has one of the best chins maybe of all time, up there with Triple G and many others. You're not going to knock Canelo out. I never feared for a second that you were going to knock Canelo out, but you can definitely disturb Canelo. You can make him very uncomfortable. You can make him so scared to come in and hit you with a vicious shot and just lay it all out. And that's what Terence Crawford did. Now, the number one greatest thing about this fight for me is that it was as good as you can get for boxing as a whole. Now, the main issue with boxing, and part of the reason why the UFC became so powerful and so prominent, is because boxers are able to meticulously avoid each other. You don't have to fight the best, and you don't have to fight the best when they are the best. You can wait for the right time to fight people or not fight people at all. Think about the heavyweight division. We had 3 great heavyweights at the same time. Joshua, Wilder, Fury. When Joshua and Wilder were both undefeated, we waited multiple years for them to just get in the damn ring and fight each other, and they never did it. The moment that Joshua beat Klitschko, we were like, Joshua has to beat Wilder now. And it would be perfect. Wilder was like 32-33, which is very good, perfect for a heavyweight. Joshua was like 26-27, perfect. All right, good age-wise, you're good. You're in your elite prime. This is the perfect time to fight each other, and they never did it. Luckily, Wilder ended up fighting Fury, and they produced one of the greatest trilogies that we'll ever see, up there with, Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier and several others, and that was fantastic. But Joshua and Wilder never fought each other, and they never really needed to. Mayweather never fought Margarito, and he never really needed to. He was not forced to, basically. Mayweather and Pacquiao fought each other too late. I'm not saying that Pacquiao would have beaten Mayweather at a younger age, but it would have been a better matchup if it was 5 years earlier, because they both would have been 5 years younger. They were both pushing 40 when they fought each other. And that's the bad thing with boxing, the politics, the fact that you have a bunch of individual sanctions, WBA, WBC, IBO, IBF, Ring Magazine, all of those belts. Guys don't have to fight each other. For the 2 biggest stars in relatively similar weight classes to come in and fight each other, not in an arena, not in MGM like Floyd always did, but in Allegiant Stadium, the Raiders Stadium, not 20,000 people, 70,000 people, and to say not a $100 pay-per-view, on Netflix, on live Netflix, where millions and millions of people are already subscribed, you don't have to buy a separate pay-per-view. This is exactly what boxing needs. People will tune into boxing if you make it entertaining and if you make it accessible to everybody. And I love that they did that. Now, lastly on this topic is how this affects, or what this says about Canelo Alvarez's legacy. The main issue with Canelo, I actually believe, is not that he didn't fight guys or avoid fight guys. The main issue is that for a long time in his career, he always seemed to get the favor of the judges. Austin Trout, Erislandy Lara, to a lesser degree Daniel Jacobs, even though he won that by unanimous decision. The first Triple G fight, which Triple G won, was a draw. And one of the judges had the audacity to score it 10-2 to Canelo when Triple G won at least 7-5, more like 8-4. Absolutely laughable. And even the fight against Floyd, when he got completely shut out by Floyd Mayweather, one of the judges has that at a draw. You can see at the end of that fight, Floyd is like, huh? Not a UD, but an MD? He always seemed to get a favor of the judges, and part of that is because of the way he fights. Canelo doesn't really jab that much. He hits you with a lot of power shots. He'll hit you in between your guard. He'll hurry you up and go through, flurries where he's just dominating the round for about 20 seconds, and then he'll rest him back up. Very visible things to judges. But if you actually just watch it from a pure boxing level, hit and not get hit, Canelo loses some fights. Not all of them, obviously not most of them, but some fights you could say you could have very easily given it to the other guy. And by the pure definition of hit and not get hit, maybe you should have given it to the other guy, and the other guy potentially got robbed. Like I said, Triple G, Austin Trout, Erislandy Lara, to a lesser degree Danny Jacobs. All those guys probably think to themselves, I feel like I was the better fighter against Canelo Alvarez, and I lost the match. And that's the biggest issue here. Not the fact that he didn't fight people. People were mad that he didn't fight David Benavidez or Demetrius Andrade or some of these other great fighters in roughly similar weight classes when they were coming up, but they didn't hold belts that Canelo desperately wanted to have, but they were so skilled, so gifted, and so talented, and Benavidez being significantly younger than him, you knew those would be great tests for Canelo, and you felt like maybe he was holding back because he truly felt like he could lose. But Terence Crawford is somebody who he was jumping up really 3 weight classes. I know it was 2 given his last fight, but really 3 because he mostly fights at 147. However good Crawford is, Canelo's just bigger and he's going to beat him. And Terence Crawford came and gave it to him and won. Like I said, he is the GOAT of this era, of this generation of boxers. Up there for me with Alexander Usyk and Naoya Inoue. I love Inoue at bantamweight. He is up there. But if I had to give one, it would be Terence Crawford. And he just put a number on Canelo. He does what he always does, and he was the better fighter. So much respect for both of these guys. And I enjoyed the matchup. One of the undercards, I forget their names, but one of the undercards was a way better matchup than this, if we're being honest, from a pure boxing level, even though it wasn't the big name excitement in the ring. But huge respect for those guys for putting on a show. And this is exactly what boxing needs. 2 of the guys who are considered the best at the same time, at the perfect time, fighting each other in front of, almost 100,000 people, 60, 70, 80,000 people, and fighting each other not on massive pay-per-views that most people can't afford and are going to pirate anyway, but on streaming like Netflix or, if we could do for free, like I'm not saying for free, but if we could do a fight like on ABC or NBC or what, I don't know how the deals would work and everything, but something like that would be whatever all of us would want to see. And that would be a treat for all of us boxing fans because it's truly a fantastic sport when you get the right guys to fight each other at the right time. But yeah, Terence Crawford, undisputed super middleweight champion over Canelo Alvarez. What a story, but he did it. And he is the GOAT of this generation of boxing.